Welcome, everybody, on behalf of Holocaust Museum LA. My name is Michael Morgenstern, and I am pleased to welcome you to our discussion with Joe Alexander, a Holocaust survivor from Poland. Before we begin, I would like to share a few words about the museum. I would also like to apologize in advance for possibly slow internet. We have some weather issues outside. Holocaust Museum LA is the first Holocaust survivor founded Holocaust museum in the United States. In the 1960s, a group of survivors worked together to create a memorial for their loved ones who perished in the Holocaust. And this memorial eventually, these survivors who established our museum did so with a mission to commemorate, educate, and inspire future generations. Furthermore, they mandated that the museum should always be free to the public, making Holocaust education accessible to everyone. Even though we are not able to be in our museum's physical space for the time being, we are still able to carry forward their mission. This morning, you'll have the honor and privilege of listening to Joe Alexander, who will share his story with you. After Joe shares his story, you'll have the opportunity to ask questions. Those watching on Zoom can use the Q&A box, and those watching on Facebook can type in your questions on, you can type in your questions in the comments on Facebook. And Joe will answer as many questions as possible. Before we begin, I also just want to remind everybody that yesterday was International Holocaust Remembrance Day. And for those who know, there are two Remembrance Days a year, one designated by the United Nations shortly after the war ended, and the other one designated by the State of Israel, which falls on the anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. So that coincides with Passover, more or less. But this one, yesterday, January 27th, is the anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. And as you will learn, that is not the end of the Holocaust, but it was, of course, significant. And Joe will share with you his recollections of Auschwitz and what he experienced before and after that. Joe has also been speaking at our museum and participating in all of our educational programs for many years now, and it's my honor to welcome him. Thank you so much, Joe, for being with us this afternoon and for sharing your story.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you very much for being here, for the introduction. So, am I ready to go on, Michael?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Well, my name is Joe Alexander. I'm a Holocaust survivor from Poland, and I survived 12 camps. I come from a small town in Poland, and my father was in business, and we had a very good life until 1939, when the Germans came into Poland. They divided Poland in two parts. One half was annexed to the Third Reich, to Germany. The second part was Poland under German occupation. We lived on the part where it was annexed to the Third Reich. So after a short time, they came into town and they went, we know, some of you probably know that in Poland, in Europe, every town has its town square. And the town square is where most of the business are. We lived in the town square, the second house from one corner of the square, and the third house was an uncle of mine. So they came in and went after my uncle and around the square and told the people they have 10 minutes to get their possessions and get out in the middle of the square, and they took them away. So a rumor started that they're gonna come back 3 days later and take the rest of us. So my dad said, we're not going to wait for them to come and give us 10 minutes. So he went out and he rented a wagon, a horse and wagon, a deep one. We had deep wagons in Europe, about 6-8 feet deep, and got one. And we packed up most of the stuff from the store, and you put a few pieces of house good, like bedding and a couple pieces of furniture on top, because from our part to the other part of Poland, we had to go through a border. So put some household goods on top that we're moving. And my parents and one sister and young brother, and they left. And I remained with two older sisters, and we were loading up another wagon. In the meantime, the Polish people were coming to town and tried to buy anything they can get. Because, you take the business people out, they're afraid they won't be able to buy anything. So I sold a man a bicycle and a boat of shirt material. And on the way home, he had to pass the police station. So he got stopped. They thought maybe they were looting. So I asked him, where did you get this? He said, I bought it, and show me a receipt. I said, I don't have a receipt. So then go and bring the person who sold it to you. So he went, so he come back to me, and he says, you have to come to me with the police on the police station and tell him what happened. So I went to the police station. He asked me, did you sell him that? I said, yes. Well, why didn't you give him a receipt? I said, we in Poland, we didn't give receipts. So he took that boat material, smacked the guy, and okay, go. And I went back, and my sisters were waiting for me, ready to take off. And we left. And we left and we went. My father had 3 sisters living 25 kilometers before Warsaw to a city named Blunie, which that part was the Poland under German occupation. So we took off when we went there. And when we came there, their life was going on almost normal. They had people still in business and so forth. It was almost normal. But then they say everybody has to go to work. So that's when I went to my first camp. It was in 1939. I went my first camp. It was a camp. I was working, building a canal. And you stay in the water up to the knee without boots. But this was a camp where you worked during the week. On the weekend, you could go home. So I worked there for a while, and I got blood poisoning. I had sores on my arms, on my legs. So I went home one weekend, and I said, I'm not going back. On Monday morning, the police came to look for me. So my dad said, he's not here. He's supposed to be in the camp. So they left. They left, and I stayed away from home for a while. I just stayed with my cousins, my friends. So then that was the time the way they started to build the wall in Warsaw, where the ghetto is going to be, the Warsaw Ghetto. So after they got through building the walls, they came out with an order, all the Jews living within 50, 60 kilometers has to move into the ghetto. So we moved into the ghetto, and the life in the ghetto, you can't even imagine what it was. It was terrible. It was very bad because the ghetto they built was a small section of Warsaw, and they put in 260,000 people. So it was very bad because people were dying every day. You walked out in the morning on the streets, there were dead people on the streets, on the sidewalks, everywhere. So I lived in the ghetto over 4 months, close to 5 months maybe. And we found out that back home, since we left, nothing changed. Everything remained the same. So my parents decided for a older sister, and I had a younger brother and we should go back home. So to have to get out of the ghetto. So we got out. We had to pay off the guards at the gate to get out. So we got out and we decided my sister and brother take one street and I'll take another street. And we walk through town and we meet on the outskirts of town. I walked for a couple, 2-3 blocks, and I had a Polish teenager comes over and he said, "Give me some money, or I'm gonna report you." So I figured, okay, I gave him some money and I got rid of him. And I kept walking. He got on the streetcar, I rode the streetcar for a few blocks and got off and comes over, "Give me some more money." So this time I gave him some more money, but I changed street and I lost him. And I walked to the outskirts of town. I met my sister and brother and we went home. So we came home and say everything was the same since we left. But it lasted 3 days. I was there for 3 days and there was an order, all the Jewish men from 16 to 60 report to the schoolhouse. So I reported to the schoolhouse and off I went to the camps. So that's when I went to the camps. I worked, the first camp I worked, we were building a dam so that they had little electric cars where you load up some loads in one place, they take them another place and they dump it. That was very hard work because we were cutting down hills. So we had to use picks to loosen up the ground. So the work was very hard and the food you were getting was a piece of bread like this in the morning and a cup of coffee and you went to work. You came back from work, you got a soup, because most of the time was the peels from the potatoes or spinach. From that food and doing this work, you couldn't survive. The only way you could survive is because we worked with civilians. Is you can organize, get just a little food, extra food. That's the only way you could survive. So people were dying every day. They were taking people out every morning, dead people from the camp. And where we were in a city, near the city of Poznan, man, there was a lot of sub camps around us, in the city and around the city. Excuse me. So people were dying. So what they did is they combined 2-3 camps into one. After a while, the same thing happened at the other camp. So I got worked at different jobs. I was laying cobblestones in Poznan, in the city. Cobblestones. And then I was building a sewer. We were working. And I was a roofer. I had all kind of work. Then the last camp there we were building an airport and I was laying railroad tracks. So after being in 7 camps, a train arrived and it wasn't a passenger train, you know, it was a cattle car train where you put 40, 50 people, you put it into one boxcar with a little window, but little 2 feet window. They closed the doors. And we got on the car, and the destination we were going, it usually takes maybe 5 to 6 hours at the most. We were riding around for 3 days with no food, no water, no facility, nothing. People were dying on the train. So finally we arrived in Auschwitz. So come to Auschwitz, and the train stopped in downtown Auschwitz. Later on, they built a train, we went straight into the camp. But at that time when I came, they didn't have that yet. So we stopped downtown, there's a little town named Oświęcim. And we got off the train. About 30–40% of the people were dead already on the train. But whoever could walk, we walked out, and we were lined up in rows of 5. And we met Dr. Joseph Mengele, if you heard about. He was the doctor called Doctor of Death. He selected people for human experiment or to the gas chamber. So he said he's going to select the people to go to the left. The people on the left are going to be taken on trucks. So he took out people, old people, sick people, and young kids. And he put me out to go to the left. If I would come from home, I wouldn't know the difference. But I was already in 7 camps. So every camp I was, when I had to go to work, I usually got in to the bigger groups with the biggest, the strongest men. So here he tells me to go to the left, and I look around, I see old people, sick people. I said, that's not the kind of people I like to be with. But my luck was, it was after midnight. If it would have been daytime, I don't think I could have done it, what I did. So after he moved further down, I ran back to the other side. If I didn't run back to the other side, I wouldn't be here talking to you. Because the people on the left were taken on trucks, went straight to the gas chamber. So I ran back to the other side, and I walked to the camp, to Auschwitz. I got a shower, and I came out of the shower, and I got a tattoo on my arm. I don't know if you can see it here in this picture. There. I got this tattoo, and from that moment on, you had no name. That was your name. And we got a tattoo, and I will walk to, there's the Auschwitz, and there's Birkenau, called Auschwitz too. And you walked over to Birkenau, which is about 3 kilometers. So I walked over to Birkenau, and I was in Birkenau for a while. And you can't even imagine. In Birkenau, when I saw people running to the electric fence to get electrocuted. I saw people being beaten to death. And I saw Dr. Mengele 2 more times in Birkenau, but it was daytime, and he was far away from where I was. So I got through there. And then the camp was getting almost empty, like I was trying to camp. They were coming sometimes to say they need people to work, but I didn't trust them. So friends of mine and I, we used to hide when they said they need people to work. We didn't report. But then after a short time, they said, now we need some people will need some tailors. So my father, my grandfather, we were all tailors. So I report, and they come right in front of me, and they said, "You go back. We don't need anymore. We have enough." So I'm still back in the camp. And excuse, excuse me. So went back, and I'm still in the camp. So after a short time, that was in 1943, and at the time when the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising was. After the Ghetto Uprising, they said they need a big transport, but they didn't want to take any people from Poland. Only Hungary, Greece, Italy, any other country but Poland. But on the end, they were short about 300 people. So they said, now we'll take the people, some people from Poland. So I report, and you get on the train, and the same thing, riding around for 3 days. And I was going back to the Warsaw Ghetto, going for the second time. Going back to the Warsaw Ghetto to clean up after the uprising. When we came back, there was no buildings left. All the buildings were all burned out, and there was no camp. So we had to build our own. They gave us some prefabs, and we had to put together some buildings for us to stay. But in the meantime, until that, we had there's no facility, nothing, no showers, nothing. So the shirt I was wearing, there was no shirt left anymore because it was eaten up from lice. It was all shreds. Until we built the camp on Sunday, we got a shower, and got some fresh clothes. So when we came back, our work supposed to be take down all those remaining walls from the buildings, brick by brick, and clean them up and put them up in stacks of 8-10 feet high. And we had Polish people coming in with a horse and wagon, and they were taking these bricks to the railroad station because they were sending them back to Germany. So that was the only camp we had plenty of food, because we found a lot of goods, household goods, kitchenware, clothing, furniture in the rubble from the burned out buildings. And when the Polish people came in with the horse and wagon, they brought bread, salami, sardines. So we were trading. So we had plenty of food, that camp. But a short time after, the typhus broke out. And if you report to the hospital, that was the end. Nobody ever came out. The typhus is when you get a high fever, high temperature. And I got the high fever, but I didn't report to the hospital because I was in a way was lucky too. I had a couple, which they called like a foreman, and he was a German man, a middle-aged man, but he also was a prisoner. So he was very good. So when I had the temperature, I was sitting with my arms crossed over, and for about 3 days until we got over the fever. Then the Polish underground attacked our camp. They were trying to free us, but they were fighting all night. They were unsuccessful. So the next morning, they closed the camp, took us out, and to get out of town, we had to jog. They were afraid we were going to get attacked by the underground in the city. So we had to jog to get out. So come late in the afternoon, around dusk, we put us up on a big field where a farmer grazed the cows. And the ground is very moist So put us on that field. So whatever means you have a knife, a spoon, anything, you could dig up some mud. So you dug up some mud, you took the bottom of your shirt and you squeezed the mud through to get a little water. So we got a little water, stayed overnight there. In the morning, we on the march on the road. So we marched to come to the next town. There was a river. So let us go to the river to get some water. Two of our people went a little too far into the river. They thought maybe they were going to escape to get out on the other side. So they got shot, got killed in the river. So we got some water and stopped marching. We marched and come to the next town. And there was the same river. But at that time, they said only 100 people at the time can go to the river to get some water. So we got some water and we were marching, walking again. And that day, it was very heavy rain, very heavy. We were walking, we were soaking wet until we arrived in the afternoon to a railroad station. We stayed overnight there. And the next morning, the same type of train, the Kaduka train, arrived. And we got on the train. And that time, we were riding for 3.5 days. And we went to Germany. So arrived in Germany to a camp named Dachau, which Hitler built in 1933 for political prisoners. Then he turned it into a concentration camp with the gas chamber. So we arrived in Dachau. So for 2 weeks, I was doing nothing, just walking around there in the camp doing nothing, because they were establishing 12 camps within the surrounding area of Dachau, within 50, 60 kilometers. So 12 camps were all by numbers from 1 to 12. So after 3 weeks, I went to go to a farmer, camp number 1, to a farmer. We were digging potatoes. That lasted 3 weeks. And then I was sent to another camp about 50 kilometers from Dachau, to a camp named camp number 7, which was located in a city called Landsberg am Lech. That was a small camp, about 150 people. But when we came there, we were a small group, just a very small group. We were in the camps already over 4 years. So we had the privilege of getting the better jobs in the camp. So like my friends worked in the kitchen, some were the police in the camp. And that was the only camp I was where women were in the same camp. But they were blocked off by wire fence, 1/4 of the camp, but we went to work together. So they got a little different jobs with some of my friends. And I got a group of 10 people. We were 5 girls and 5 boys to work outside the gate to a kitchen for the German guards. And there were 2 German men in charge of the kitchen. And they were very, very good to me. They were not the regular army. So they were 2 middle-aged men. They were very good to me because every day I went back to the camp. I took food back for my friends. Then we had soup left over from the dinner. So I took a milk, we had big milk cans, put in one of the milk cans. And the next morning, the people going to work, they had to pass by our kitchen. So I stopped them and I gave them some food. a couple of times, the officer in charge of the guards complained to my camp that I'm holding up the people going to work. So they said to me, okay, don't worry, let them talk. Don't worry about it. Do what you're doing. So that lasted until April 28, 1945. All the 12 camps had to go back to Dachau. So went back to Dachau, stayed overnight on a field there, on a field court. And in the morning, we were going on called a death march. They're supposed to take us in to the to the mountains in Germany. There's a ski resort named Garmisch. So they're supposed to kill us there. But we walked about 2 days. We knew we're not going to be walking too far because we could hear the fighting. So we knew the American troops are not far behind us. And so planes coming over and bombing the city. So about 2 days, we crossed a little bridge and the bridge was blown up. So our group was divided in two sections. I was on the side, on the right side of the bridge, and we were in a little village, and there was a little forest there. So they took us into the forest and asked for volunteers to take the 6 people into the village and put them into the farmers, into the barn, and the volunteers to come back. On the way back, one was a friend of mine, very close friend. And on the way back, they found a dead horse in the snow. So they cut off some pieces from the horse and came back. And that friend of mine, he brought me back a piece of horse meat. And that was him here on this picture. His name was Joe Buddha. So he gave me a piece of meat and he said, do something. So we were in the forest, so we had wood, so I made a fire and I was barbecuing. And believe me, that was the best meal we had in a long time. In the meantime, during the night, the German guards disappeared. So in the morning, German police came and they take us into the village and they disappeared. That was in the morning about between 8 and 9 o'clock. So we were just walking around in the village and waiting to see what's going to happen. So between 12 and 1 o'clock, an American tank moved in and we were liberated. So we were free. So when the American tank moved in, so the troops were behind them, trying to close off the village. But we were a group, 9 of us. We didn't want to get blocked in. So we broke through and started walking to see where the next town is. So we walked for about 1 or 2 kilometers and there was a German bakery. So we went into the bakery and everybody got a bread. If you had a bread, you were okay. And start walking to find the next town. Then we come to a town named Bad Tölz, about 40 kilometers from Munich. And we come into the town and we see 3 American soldiers walking, and they were Czechoslovakian descent. They were so drunk they couldn't walk. They were holding on to each other. And what they saw was the way we were dressed, I guess. They realized, so they said, are you Polish? I said, yes. So they said, come on. And they took us in to an underground bunker, which was a warehouse. You couldn't see the end of it. There was so much stuff in there. So the first thing, we changed clothes. Everybody took a backpack. And then there was a big row of bicycles chained up. So they broke the chain, so we gave everybody a bicycle. Now we have to find a place to stay. Excuse me. When when the troops came into that village, they brought all the people into that city, and they were used to be a Air Force base, German Air Force base. They made a DP camp, a displaced person camp. So, but we didn't want to go to the camp. So we tried to get out the street. You couldn't, it was 6 o'clock was curfew. It was after 6 o'clock, we couldn't get out. So we hopped over about 3 or 4 fences, I remember. And we came to a German inn, which was taken over by the American troops. In the back of the inn, there was an empty house. So we took over the house. So we stayed in the house for about 10 days. And after living there for 10 days, they came out and an order that anybody who lives outside the camp has to move into the camp. So we moved into the camp and we were taken back to Munich. And Munich was a DP camp. You could live in the camp if you want to, or you can go any place you want. You are free. So I lived in the camp for about 3 days. And some of the friends of mine, we decided to go back to the city of Landsberg, where camp number 7 was, the last camp. To go back there, Landsberg was one of the largest DP camps in Germany. So I went to the camp and I registered in the camp, gave us a room. I stayed there overnight in that room. And the next morning, I moved out. I didn't want to live in the camp. I had over 5 years camps. So I moved out 7 kilometers from town to a village and lived in a farmhouse. I lived in a farmhouse there and I was doing all right. But after about 6 weeks, I decided to go back to Poland, to my hometown, to find out if any of my family survived. No, when we came to Landsberg and went to register, the reason we went to register, and even later on, we went to a lot of DP camps to register, in case anybody of your family survived. So everybody went to look through the list of the camps to see if any of your names are there. So I went back home, and I come home and I go to my house. So I had survivors were living on the second floor. The first floor was some Polish people were living. So they told me none of my immediate family survived, except one of my cousins. He was a year younger than I. We grew up from childhood. We grew up together, went to schools together, to Prejudice. He survived, but he's in a different town. So at that time, it was very bad for survivors who came back in Poland, because the Polish people killed a lot of survivors. In one town named Kielce, they killed 42 survivors in one town. Because when they took the Jews out, they moved into the houses. Now they didn't want to give up the houses, so they were killing a lot of Jews. So I said the cousin survived in a different town, so I want to go, and I got him, and I told him, "Say, come on, we're going back to Germany," because at that time the safest place you could be was in Germany. So I got him, and we went back to Germany. So I lived in Germany for 4 more years because you couldn't go any place. You had no passport, you couldn't go, and no place to go. So I had to wait until somebody opened up. So after 4 years, said you can go register Canada, it will take you. So you have to go and register, then you have to wait for them to call you. It went by a long time and didn't hear anything. So in the meantime, a friend of mine lived in the next village, and he said, "Joe, you can go now to Munich and register to go to America." So we went to Munich and registered to go to America. And in a very short time, I got a notice to go to see the American doctor, to go through, and then go checked out by the FBI. And then I got a notice to go to Bremerhaven, that's the port in Germany, to get the boat. So I left there on May 13th. I went on the train to go to Bremen and came to Bremen. And I got on the boat and I came to the United States on May 30th, 1949. When I came to the United States, it arrived in New York, went through Ellis Island, and everybody had to have a sponsor. Either you had relatives or an organization. I didn't have any relatives here, so I was sponsored by the Jewish organization called the Joint. And so everybody had a contract. So my contract was to go to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. So I went to Harrisburg, and I lived in Harrisburg for about 6 months. And my cousin who survived, he had an uncle here in Santa Monica, and he was his sponsor. So I came in May, and he came in October. So I came to Santa Monica and told his uncle that I'm in Pennsylvania, and we were the only 2 survivors in our families. So the uncle called me a couple of times I should come here so we can be together again. So I arrived in New York, in Los Angeles, in 1950, January 1950, and here I am. Now, you have any questions for me, so I can answer you.
Thank you so much, Joe, for sharing your story with us. We do have some questions for you. But before we do that, I would actually like to share with the audience some of your photos.
Yeah. To the top right, you see, that was my father. And on the left was his brother. He lived in London, England. And was my grandparents, my grandfather and grandmother on the bottom. That picture was taken in 1923 at the border of Poland and Germany, because my uncle left Poland, didn't want to go to the army, so he went to England. So he couldn't come back to Poland. So they both met at the border. So that's what that picture was taken. That was my sister. She was the older sister. And that's the only picture I have is of her. The rest of the family, I don't have anything. This is the train we were riding in. That's a boxcar where they put 40, 50 people into that boxcar. As you can see, as you can see there, this is my number, and this is my liberation papers from Dachau when I was liberated, and there's my number, 142584. That was a tattoo from Auschwitz. This is the way we lived in the camps. One section, you see, was for 3 people. The one on the second row to the right, way over to the right, you see a little man down here. That was Elie Wiesel. That was him here. So this is the section where we live. There is a picture in front of the farmhouse where I used to live in Germany. And the man on the left, the tall guy, that was my friend who brought the horse meat. And on the right, that's my cousin. This is a driver's license I have from Germany, which is, there's no expiration date on this. It's a lifetime driver's license. That's a Dachau. I don't know, Michael, do you have the one from Auschwitz?
I don't have that one here, but
Well, maybe.
I can probably find it and pull it up by the end.
This is the boat I arrived in the United States, called SS Stewart. This boat was going back and forth. Matter of fact, I came on this boat in May, and my cousin told you came in October. You came on the same boat. But the boats were going back and forth at that time. There's a picture of me when I lived here in Victorville. I was at the Air Force Base. We had a tailor shop there at the base. That was my first car.
Well, thank you again so much for sharing your story, and we do have quite a few questions.
Okay.
So let's see. First question is, did you eat meat when you were in any of the camps?
Me? What was that?
Meat. Did you?
I know. I know.
I see what you're saying.
Me? No, you didn't see any meat. There was no meat. We only ate soup, and just a piece of bread. That's all.
When you talked about returning to your hometown of Kowal, I think once or twice, can you talk about that experience of going back afterwards?
Well, the experience wasn't a happy one, because you came back and my whole family was gone. Plus so many relatives, uncles, aunts, cousins. Nobody was there, nobody's left. So it was a very bad feeling. But I wanted to go back and to see myself. So feeling wasn't good.
Thank you very much. And if you can remind the audience, how old were you during all of this? So we'll say from 1939 through 1945, how old were you?
Well, I was 16 when I started, and then I was 21. When I was liberated.
Thank you very much. Let's see.
And now I'm 98.
Thank you very much. One of our audience members would like to know what the biggest thing is that has helped you cope with trauma afterwards, and what's helped you throughout the rest of your life to cope with these experiences.
Well, what helped me is to go on with my life, build a new life, but you can't forget the old life. You think about it every day, but there's nothing you can do about it. So life goes on. And you have to build a new future. And this is my life now is what I'm doing is trying to educate the young people, talk to all the schools, as many schools I can, and to let them know what happened, and to let them know that if some people, there's a lot of Holocaust deniers and a lot of anti-Semitism going on, not to believe what they hear or see. They let them know that here they're talking to a survivor who lived through it. So this is my whole thing now, is just to talk as many people I can.
Thank you very much. And a related question to that, what advice would you give to younger generations in order to prevent this sort of thing from happening again?
Well, like I tell them, you hear about Holocaust deniers, or you see some anti-Semitism going on, don't believe in it. And I call it those Holocaust deniers that they're stupid. They're nothing but just talk, because all the evidence is still in existence. All the camps you go to today, Auschwitz, Dachau, Majdanek, Treblinka, Buchenwald, all the gas chambers and the ovens are still there, and you have thousands of people daily before the COVID. They're down there every day. There were thousands from all over the world. And there's people going and witnessing. So don't believe what they tell you.
Thank you very much for that answer. One of the audience members would like to clarify. You mentioned that after the war ended, you felt safer in Germany than you did in Poland. Can you explain that, please, and talk about the circumstances that made you feel safer in Germany after the war?
Because in Germany, because they had guilt, the Germans had a guilt. So they were trying to do whatever they could to survive us, not to, so that we don't think of them what happened. So that's why they treat us very good. That's why we were safe in Germany.
Thank you very much. And Um, Joe, you have a question from Cantor Stacy. She would like to know roughly how many kids you think, and audiences in general, how many people do you think you've spoken to through the museum? Um, and to your knowledge, have you ever met a denier?
No, I've never met a denier, but I've spoken, I think, to tens of thousands of people. Because I spoke to, for instance, last year through the museum, I went to Bakersfield and I spoke there in one day. I spoke 3 times to over 1,000 kids in one day. Plus other schools around here. One school in North Hollywood last year spoke was 1,600 kids in one school. And so forth. In every school, and all the schools I speak to the museum, and also in private homes. So I would say tens of thousands of people I spoke to already.
Thank you very much. And I can clarify, before the pandemic, Joe would speak to students at least once a week to large
Yeah,
classes, 40, 50
yeah,
students at least. And he's been doing this for about 4 years and now on Zoom as well. So Joe has spoken
that's right.
to many, many students
I
and
spoke
other
yesterday,
so-called immigrants.
Michael. I spoke yesterday to a
Um,
school. I spoke yesterday here in the Pacific Palisades. Were over 300 people. They said they only had the room for 300, and more people were trying to get in on Zoom yesterday. It
thank
was Holocaust Day.
well, and of course, as always, thank you so much for doing that. Somebody would like to know, going back a little bit, if you remember the moments that you were separated from your family members and what that was like, and acknowledging that this is a painful question, do you remember if you had the chance to say goodbye?
Well, yes, I had the chance to say goodbye when I went out. When my parents decided for me, my sister and brother to go back home to get out of the Warsaw Ghetto. And that's the last time I saw him. That's the only time I had a chance to say goodbye. And that's about it.
Thank you very much. When you came to the United States, we have a few questions about your settling here. What did you do for work?
Well, when I came here, I was a tailor. At first, I got a job here in Los Angeles, working as a tailor in one of the shops. And that wasn't a good experience because I got to a shop and I was working for 2 weeks. I was making $19 a week. They said, after 2 weeks, you can join the union and you'll get $30 a week. So after the 2 weeks, I joined the union, and Monday morning, I come back to work, and the foreman said, "You're fired." He didn't want to pay $30. So that uncle, my cousins, uncle had a store in Riverside. So he told me, go to Riverside, and you'll be your own boss. He has clothes there, and I was making shirts and pants and put it in the store until a short time. That was 1950. The Korean War started, and they mobilized the National Guard. So Victorville was an Air Force base. They closed it in 46. And now they reopened the base. And I got a tailor shop there at the base. So I was at the base for 7 years, and then I came to Los Angeles and opened a store here in Los Angeles on Melrose called the Los Angeles Uniform Exchange. And so I was here for 37 years at the store, and then I retired. We sold the store and retired.
Thank you so much. So you talked a little bit about the process of coming to the United States, and when you finally got here, you were able to find this work as a tailor, and then you started your business. What was your family structure? Did you start a family?
I started a family here in Los Angeles after when I moved to Los Angeles. I got married, and we started a family. And I have a daughter and a son. But my wife passed away about 26 years ago. She had cancer.
Where did you meet your wife?
That's another story. Well, I met my wife in 1957. After I left Victorville, I went on a vacation back east. And I went back to the city of Harrisburg. And I met my wife there at 10. And we got married in Harrisburg and came back to Los Angeles.
Thank you very much. When did you first start sharing your story, and did you talk about it to your wife and children as they were growing up?
Yes. Yes, I did. I always did. Yeah. And I started to speak is the first time I think I speak was in 1997. I had a friend here in Culver City, and he belonged to a club. It was a Jews and Gentiles called the Exchange Club, and they were meeting every Tuesday for lunch. So one day he said, "Joe, why don't you come? Why don't you talk to our people?" So that was 1997. That was the first time I spoke. And then I had a neighbor who were teaching a museum at the synagogue, at the Bet Am synagogue here. She was teaching Holocaust lessons, study, and she asked me to come and talk to her students several times. And so on. That's when I was going out, just talking to her school and the other schools. And then I met at one time, I know a man called a Bob Gemender, who was a member of the Holocaust Museum. And his son met a friend of his and told him about me. So Bob called me and he said, asked me if I want to come to talk to the museum. And that was what, about 3-4 years ago. Mm-hmm. And I haven't been speaking there since.
Thank you very much. And I would actually just like to share with everybody that Bob Jeminder was on our board of directors. He spoke at our museum regularly. Unfortunately, he passed away. And he actually passed away 2 years ago yesterday. It was just coincidentally on International Holocaust Remembrance Day, but he was a big part of our museum. And of course, we were grateful that he introduced you.
Yeah, he was a great, wonderful man. Great
he
guy.
really was. Yes, thank you for mentioning him. Do you know, or at least approximately, how many relatives of yours perished in the Holocaust? So with your immediate family and then your cousins, aunts, and uncles?
There was, I don't know exactly. I never got through counting, but I know there were several hundred relatives because we had big families. My father had three sisters, and my mother had a two, three sisters and one brother, and they all had kids and grandkids. So it was a lot. We had a big family.
Thank you very much. Um, moving forward again to the United States, do you remember what it was like to learn English?
It wasn't easy, but when I came here, so I had like I had the shop in Victorville on the base, so I had no choice. I had to learn English as fast as I could, because that's all I was dealing with is American people. So it took some little time, but I tried the best I could.
Thank you very much. Um, do you did you ever face prejudice in the United States?
Not personally. I never, never faced any personal pressure.
When you lived in, or since you've lived in Los Angeles, have you cultivated a lot of friendships with other Holocaust survivors?
Yes, yes, I did. Matter of fact, I had several Holocaust survivors. I was in the camps with them together. But unfortunately, now they're all gone. I don't have anybody left, which I was in the camps with them. 73 years. The only ones I have is a couple of the children from the survivors. So I have two, actually two, three of them, three children of the survivor.
Thank you. Do you remember what year you were naturalized? What year you?
1956.
Thank you. Um, did your family, how religious was your family before 1939, before your life changed? And did that play a role in your survival, do you think?
Yes, it did. Yeah, no, my father, we were Orthodox, but modern Orthodox. Matter of fact, my father, we had a synagogue in our house. I had on the second floor, we rented a room for a Jewish organization, which was called the Free Loan. They were giving loans to the poor people without no interest. And my father was the secretary, where they used to come every Friday make a payment. So, but they used the room once a month for a couple hours. So the room stayed empty. So my dad made a synagogue. And we used to have services there every weekend and holidays. So it was very, your father was very orthodox.
Thank you very much. Um, do you remember any kind of thing that you might have thought to yourself during these years when you were in concentration camps about your own survival? Anything that you might have thought to yourself to help get you through it, or any hope about the future?
Well, I've been asked from speaking to all the schools to the kids. A lot of them asked me, the same question. Did you ever think of giving up? I said, no, I never did. I never lost faith and never lost hope. I used to tell him, if I thought I had a bad day, I said, today may be a bad day, but I hope tomorrow will be a better day. But never give up. Don't lose faith and never give up. And I get letters from those kids, and they all remember the words I've told them. They always remember that. Never give up.
Thank you very much. Do you, how do you feel after you share your story? And you mentioned that you've been doing it for quite some time now. Has it gotten easier to do over the years?
Yes, it's gotten easier because you keep on telling the people, and the more people are listening, the better it is. So you know that you're doing your job, you're doing something that people will remember what happened, and don't let it forget. So remember what happened, and hope it doesn't happen again.
Thank you. We have some young students who are watching today, and one of them would like to know if you consider yourself or other survivors heroes.
No, don't consider myself any hero. I'm just a survivor and trying to educate young kids to let them know, because there's so many kids at the schools today don't even saying that they'd never heard of the Holocaust. So, and they never knew. Ask a lot of them Auschwitz. They don't know what Auschwitz means. They never heard of it. So this is why every day, if I can just get one or two of them to let them know what happened, it makes me happy.
Well, thank you so much, Joe, as always, for sharing your story with us this afternoon. Again, thank you also for all the years that you have been educating students at the museum, for in person and now on Zoom for the last year. You've been doing this for such a long time. And as you said, you've probably reached tens of thousands of people, including today. We had about 100 people listening here just on Zoom, and people will be listening on Facebook afterwards as well. So we thank you so much. And anybody in the audience who is interested or who knows any educators, please remind them that our museum offers virtual field trips, virtual tours of the museum with survivor speakers, as the survivors who founded our museum in the 1960s mandated. Our programs are free of charge, and our goal is to educate to the public, and especially to young students. So if anybody knows teachers, please pass on the word and pass on our website. Joe, again, thank you so much for sharing with us this afternoon. And if there's anything you would like to say to conclude to our audience and to some of the students who are watching with us today, you're welcome to do so.
Yes, I would like to say I've spoken even in Italy, in Rome. I spoke to a graduating class. And also I spoke in Florence, in Italy, to a group. And also I speak here through the museum. I think I'm reached people globally, because after one time, this last year, I spoke here And I had a call from Israel. My cousins in Israel said they saw me. They are speaking. And also a friend of mine in London, England. They called me and said they saw me in England. So I know people from Germany that they said they saw me in Germany. So I don't know how many other countries. So how important it is to reach globally people. So I think that's very important. And it's a big honor for me to do that.
Well, thank you so much again for speaking this afternoon and for everything you do to educate our community and our world now with technology. So as you said, this can be shown almost anywhere in the world now.
That's right.
So thank you again. Wishing everybody a happy, healthy, and safe weekend ahead. Thank you again, Joe, and thank you to our audience for tuning in. And we hope to see you next Thursday at 11 o'clock for our weekly Public Survivor Talk. And please follow our website and our Facebook page, our social media, to see about the rest of our upcoming programs. We have all sorts of programs going on virtually during this time, so please tune in. Thank you very much again, everybody, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you, everybody, for listening.